Have you ever been to a wedding where someone actually speaks up during the part where they ask if anyone has any reason the two should not be wed? If so, what happened? Not during the ceremony, but at the reception. The father of the bride was supposed to give a speech. He got up and all he said was, "Don't worry, groom's name. When I got married my in-laws didn't like me either," and sat down. You could hear a pin drop in the room. Worked as a videographer once. I turned up to the rehearsal, planned out shots, liaised with the priest about how to get the best coverage while not disrupting anything, and arrived up 2 hours early on the day to get set up. The stills photographer rocked up 5 minutes after the bride on the day, asked if she could come in again so he could photograph it, and then at the "or forever hold your peace" part, kicked over his own tripod, smashed his camera and shouted "frick." Yes, it was at my wedding. A friend's very sweet 5-year-old little boy shouted no at the top of his voice. Then he went and hid at the back of the room while his mother died of embarrassment. We all laughed and carried on. Thankfully didn't count as a lawful objection. That's actually really adorable that you can tell the story of your objection at your wedding. The wedding was held at the bride's parents' home. They thought they had every detail covered until the question was asked, and the officiant did his poignant pause. That's when the cuckoo clock decided to speak up. When the laughter finally faded, the ceremony continued, but the bride, the groom and the minister all chuckled through the rest of the ceremony. Best wedding ever. That's awesome. My dad, a somewhat former pastor, he still fills in for churches when their pastors are out, is the one who officiated my sister's wedding. Around Christmas time in our basement in front of the tree. You bet he had a hard time not crying, lol. Sort of. My own wedding. My mill hated me. I married a southerner. I'm a damned Yankee. And we are of different religions. She did everything she could to stop her daughter from dating me, including cutting off her tuition. Anyway, we decided to get married by a justice of the peace. He was retired and really cool. Former judge and minister. He asked questions and so we had to tell him about my witch of a mill. So the night of the rehearsal, just as we are wrapping up, this 85-year-old Jop stands up and asks for everyone's attention. He said, "These two kids love each other and are getting married tomorrow. If anyone has any objections they can speak now because they will not ruin the ceremony tomorrow." Then he proceeded to look coldly at Mill and said, "Is there anything you want to say?" Her face scrunched up like she was sucking on a lemon. You knew she had been planning on it all along and had just had all the wind taken out of her sails. She cowed down and just shook her head. He just looked at her and said, "I thought not." The phrase was never uttered during the wedding, so all was well. B still hates me even now, though her daughter and I have been married 27 years now. I'm so happy THST you have a long and successful marriage. That Jop is an absolute unit. I was at a wedding where the infant child of the couple getting married started making noises, denying the silence of acceptance. Could be worst. My sister's kid was a toddler when my sister married my niece's father. My niece went up to the unity candle, said "pretty hot" and blew the candle out. Years later they got divorced. She kinda sounded like a Toy Story alien when saying it, so it was a tiny bit adorable. Yes, it was terrible. Her adult son threw a fit, gave a speech, the whole 9 yards. It was more like an emotional breakdown tantrum. It was crazy. Not at the wedding, but at the reception. When my best friend got married, her mom made a speech during the reception about how her daughter was a S and her son-in-law deserved better. I never wanted to punch somebody so much in my life, but the maid of honor punching the mother of the bride would just be the cherry on top of an already disastrous wedding. No, but when my cousin got married there was a lot of my family, aunts and uncles mostly, but also her parents, that were very against it for a number of reasons and had said they would object when the time came. The time never came. The priest never asked. That part of the ceremony was completely skipped on purpose. 10 years later they are still married. He controls everything she does and she's not allowed to have a job or leave the house. She has a master's degree in early childhood education and development, but they are on welfare because he only works when he can no longer collect unemployment. I worry about this on the flip side and what her family thinks of me. I am only a tech school grad currently on unemployment, and she is big time doctor, worked at both Yale and Cambridge. But she has gained rather serious agoraphobia and won't leave the bedroom, so won't work, and my current health stops me from working. I'll wager each side of the family has opposite opinions for each of us. At my wedding, my mom was the officiant, so she didn't put it in because we assumed we'd have at least one person from his side say something. My in-laws still made sure to beg my now husband not to marry me literally minutes from when the wedding was supposed to start. After our honeymoon, there were like 3 months that we lived with my in-laws. They would beg him to leave me, take full custody of our son, and just forget about me. In front of me, they would tell him that I wasn't the girl they had planned for him. Very controlling people, or that there was someone that they thought would better fit into the family, etc. We've been together almost 4 years now, and Phil will still say things like that in front of me. Middle waits until I'm not around to say things. Your husband needs to tell them to STFU. How's an almost? I found out 2 days ago that 20 years ago, on our wedding day, I've been divorced for 7 years. My morally bankrupt ex-H started his cheating ways before we even started our 12+ year marriage, which almost didn't even happen because of a wedding crashing mistress. His groomsmen spent the 30 minutes before the ceremony stopping this girl and making sure he still wanted to go through with the wedding, knowing that his other girlfriend was about to crash it. So you're not friends with the groomsmen then? Real answer. So awful. The question is intended to ask if anyone knows of a legal reason the wedding should not proceed. For example, if a bride or groom is already married to someone else. It was never meant to be taken as an open invitation to share opinions on the quality of their relationship. Exactly this. It's still very popular in the UK because it's illegal to be married and have another wedding before divorcing first. No, but our priest sat my family aside and lectured them against it because my wife and I were afraid dad or my sister would try something. Why would they try something? Yes, but it was scripted beforehand. Our friends decided that weddings are kinda boring and they wanted to have more fun with theirs. So when the officiant asked the question, a man stood up and started dramatically declaring his love for the bride, ran up to the altar, and begged her to choose him instead. He said he'd make all her dreams come true. My husband, the best man, stabbed the guy in the back with a stage dagger. He fell to the ground and the groomsmen dragged his limp body off to the side, and the service continued. It was epic. A friend of mine planned something very interesting for the wedding of a little friend of his. She was a little person and she was marrying a regular sized dude. During the forever hold your peace party, he had another little person run in and say she was betraying her own kind. It was freaking epic and talked about it for years. I was a bridesmaid at a very Catholic wedding where they actually asked this question. In 2000, there was a layer of tension among the family and guests because the couple was very young, had only known each other 6 months, and the groom was clearly very gay. I myself witnessed him get a handy at a club from a drag queen. So when the question was asked, the church got very quiet. It felt like everyone was hoping someone else would actually say something. At that moment, the priest's microphone gave off a blaring feedback. Everyone laughed. I'm not a religious person, but man, that felt like a sign. Mate of mine went to a wedding where this question was asked, and someone stood up and said, I do. You can't marry them. They already eloped, and the bridal party laughed and confirmed it. They'd eloped a month earlier and were already married. Kinda sweet. This is low-key kinda wholesome. I've shot over 400 weddings. Not once did they ask that question. That stupidity ended about the same time the airlines asked if you packed a bomb on board with you. I've only shot at 3 weddings and then they got restraining orders. First time at a wedding. I wasn't listening, but the man said please raise, and so I did. I'm the only one standing and the bride told me to sit the F down bean. When I was 10, my aunt got married. It was a really small ceremony, just very close family, and my brother, 8, and I were the ring bearers. Nobody told us when we were supposed to present the rings, so when they said the bit about speak now or forever remain silent, he figured that it was a good time to give the ring. He went and gave it to my aunt, and for a second there was this really awkward silence, and then we all just started laughing. We look back on it now and tease him about it a lot. This killed me. Holy frick, that's hilarious. No, but one time somebody told the bride's parents that the groom had a secret girlfriend and was going along with this marriage for show. The bride's mother slapped the groom's mother on stage. Not the object to this marriage question, but I heard of a local wedding where the church service was beautiful and the reception was near perfect. After the speeches to the bride and groom, the bride spoke in appreciation for all friends, family, and her new husband and their excitement for life together. The groom was last to speak and thanked everyone for being so good to them, and then apologized that they had to be part of such deceit. He explained that the night before his bride was fricking his best man and that he was filing for annulment immediately. He also explained that he felt it best to proceed with the wedding while he made his final decision. He also suggested that the father of the bride, who paid significant amounts towards their wedding, hold both his daughter and the best man financially responsible. Then he walked out. Yay. My cousin got married back in 07 and her fiancé was sleeping around with one of the bridesmaids. She knew about it, so she said it out loud clearly so everyone could hear. The gasps and laughter were everywhere. She was so pee that she took off her shoes, threw them at him and the slag of a friend she had, and took off in their honeymoon car. It was crazy. Yeah, one of the groom's exes spoke up after having a few cocktails, IDK why she was invited, and said that the bride should watch out because the groom has a very misshapen and strangely colored shaft and it doesn't function correctly, and fires off when it's not supposed to. They were saving themselves, so I guess the bride didn't know yet. It was awkward. That must have been incredibly weird to discuss after the wedding for the couple. Even if the guest was lying, it would have made for an uncomfortable conversation. Yes, at my own wedding. First off, I'm a lesbian and my wife's dad is really homophobic, though he doesn't straight out admit it. At the wedding, when they asked for objections, her dad stood up and said, "Think about it, wife's name. She's in the Navy. You'll rarely see her. Plus, she'll probably sleep with other girls while she's deployed." It was really upsetting, but I still have an amazing and loving wife. Yes, unfortunately, my older brother and sister have always been super close. They're both much older than me, so I always felt like the third wheel in sibling stuff. When my sister started dating this guy she met at college, seriously, I could tell something wasn't sitting right with my brother. I could hear him crying at night and he was missing work a whole lot. She was a big part of his life. I figured he was upset that she wouldn't moving back home after college. Eventually, it all blew over, but I could tell he still wasn't right. My sister's boyfriend eventually proposed to her and she said yes. Their wedding seemed like a fairy tale. Her fiancé was a software engineer for an investment firm, so he was loaded. We all thought it was going to be the wedding of the decade. On the day of the wedding, my brother is nowhere to be seen. My parents were starting to get concerned, but they kept quiet because they didn't want to ruin my sister's big day. Everything was absolutely perfect. As we sat and watched the 40-hour-long Catholic ceremony, we heard car come to a screeching halt in front of the church. Everyone turned their head towards the door waiting to hear a crash. A few moments later the church doors open and it's my brother. It's a big church, so I didn't have a good view, but I could hear people gasping. I knew some juicy crap was going down. As my brother got closer, I noticed why everyone was in such shock. He was completely naked and drunk. He stood in front of the front row and slurred "I object" like they do in the movies. It was there that he broke down and admitted his love for our sister. He revealed that they had been sleeping together for several years. My jaw was on the floor at this point. My mom was hysterical and my dad held my mom with his eyes closed. My brother then went on to reveal that he had gotten my sister pregnant and that he was broken over her decision to abort. He said he still wanted to start a family with her and that her fiancé didn't deserve her. Several of my uncles dragged him away as he screamed about his love for my sister. Upon learning this news, the priest cancelled the ceremony and the wedding was called off. My sister's fiancé didn't say a word. He just left and we never saw him again. I still talk to my sister, but her and my brother have been excommunicated from the family. My parents even went as far as taking them off their wills. Please tell me you made this up. Actually yes. It was a same-sex marriage where the parents and family of spouse 1 were incredibly homophobic and religious. They have been estranged for years due to bulls that they did about their child's sexuality. Somehow they found out about the wedding. None of them we invited, and showed up as a group mid-ceremony yelling about how they object to this union and it is ungodly for a man to marry a man. It ended with all of them being carried out by other guests and locking the door so they couldn't come in. The whole group stood outside the venue yell all night until we left. I hated upvoting this only due to the awfulness endured. I hope the couple is happy. Great grandma said she should have stayed home. Result was a moment of silence, then everyone smiled. Most badass women I ever met. The closest I had was when my wife almost said no at our wedding. She hates being the center of attention, so she tried to crack a joke due to being uncomfortable. When asked, she had said "wheel," and at that moment, one of my groomsmen was already planning our escape so he could take me to a bar and get me blackout drunk so I'd forget her. At the same time, the entire room went dead silent, as if they were fearing she'd say number. I'm sure she wasn't thinking about saying number. At my sister's wedding, their daughter, my beautiful goddaughter and niece, who was a bridesmaid and 2 years old, escaped from her wrangler and shouted, "Mummy, no woo" at the exact perfect moment. It was more to do with not being allowed to play with the wooden nativity scene at the front of the church than any deep-seated concerns about matrimony, but it was still beautiful timing. Everyone laughed and they got married with a toddler on one hip. Kinda same topic, but ended at a classy 5-star old Canadiana railway hotel. Smaller wedding banquet for a military wedding. Image. Lots of army men in formal uniforms. Bride and groom retire to their suite for the night in the same hotel after leaving partiers to enjoy more music, dancing, etc. They find their suite has been pranked. Furniture removed. Luggage taken. Bed short sheeted. Champagne emptied. Bathroom shaving gelled. Groom returns to banquet room. Furious. Takes mic and tells everyone off with lots of cursing. "You ruined our wedding day. Take your gifts back and get the F out." Lights go up. DJ shuts down. Party over. I went to a wedding recently for one of my husband's friends. Nobody liked the relationship between the bride and groom, including both families and all the friends. It was super toxic and controlling and they managed to completely isolate themselves by hating on everyone. The wedding was mainly just immediate family and a few of the groom's childhood friends. It was the shortest wedding in history. When the time came where the minister asked if anyone would object to the marriage, it was completely skipped. I think the couple knew that there were several people who would have objected, so just decided not to have it. Also, they put the wedding on the day of a grand final, so more than a few people had their phone out during the ceremony watching it. When they were announced man and wife, nobody clapped. Everyone left quietly, and then at the reception, there was a betting pool for how long until they would get divorced. I haven't, but my brother spoke up at a wedding. The groom's jacket was folded up and under itself at the back and nobody noticed. My brother didn't want the photos to be ruined, so at that point when asked if anyone had something to say, my brother said, "Fix your jacket." I think he got some laughs and they fixed it before continuing. Yep, traditional Roman Catholic ceremony. Kind of an obscure part of the matrimonial law, but if this happens then the priest will call upon the objector to validate the challenge. If the objector is male, this is done through a match of Roman skull wrestling. They will stand in a ring of rice with hands tied behind backs, forehead to forehead, and attempt to push their opponent out using only the forehead. The groom is typically the opponent but may call swapsies and choose a groomsman. The objector may then also call swapsies and choose any member of the congregation so long as they are baptized. If the objector is female, then the contest is timed balancing of the priest's scepter on the right pinky. Similar swapsies rules apply. In my case, the objector was female and lost the balancing contest by 2 full minutes and had apparently objected only because the bride's father had borrowed her rototiller and returned it with an empty gas tank and 2 bent tines. Ceremony resumed and all was good. OMG, I'm Catholic, and while this is all total balls, it is very funny. First of all, you don't get to just object to someone getting married. The actual line when used says, "If anyone has any lawful reason this couple can't be joined, speak now or forever hold your peace." Lawful means that they are brother and sister, or married already, or some other lawful reason. It's not just a blank check to say oh I don't approve. But in reality, this line is only used in movies and on TV, not real world. It's still used all the time at British weddings. Just tradition, really. Bigamy is illegal in the UK and the celebrant registrar can get in legal bother if they married a couple knowing it would be unlawful for them to be married. The most important part of a wedding ceremony is the signing of the certificate at the end because that goes on the books and makes the marriage legally binding. Yes, turns out repeating that stupid Family Guy joke's genital warts isn't funny in real life and is just cringe and ruins the day for everyone. Also getting your crap kid to do it too won't do you any favors. OMG what? I walked out at a buddy's Catholic wedding ceremony about 20 years ago. I did have something to say about it but I didn't want to ruin their day. They are still married. We were at a wedding of a good friend who was marrying someone that we weren't particularly fond of. He's growing on us, albeit slowly, but she likes him, so shrug. They got to the point where they asked for objections. It got totally silent, and then my 4-month-old let out the worst wail I've ever heard. It was all I could do to keep from laughing until I peed myself. My wife looked like she wanted to die. I was not at the wedding. It was way before I was born, but I did get to see the fallout from the event. When my aunt was married, my great-grandmother, who died before my birth, stood up at the point in the ceremony where they asked for reasons that the bride and groom should not be married and declared that she is not a Smith, pointing at my aunt, her own granddaughter. She is getting married under a false name. Apparently nobody had a clue what she was talking about and everybody assumed that she had started to suffer from dementia, and so as she began to rant about my aunt's name not being Smith, some of the members of the family removed her from the church and the ceremony continued. Fast forward 50 or more years and my grandmother, my aunt's mother, is dying, but a few weeks before she passed away she told my aunt that her father, my grandfather, was not her biological father and that she had married him after she had given birth to her. My grandfather obviously knew the truth and so did my great-grandparents, but I presume everybody else just assumed that he was the father all along. My grandmother refused, however, to tell her who her father was. When we dug a little into the family tree we uncovered my aunt's birth certificate. Sure enough, she was registered under my grandmother's maiden name and not my grandfather's name. At most non-movie weddings, they don't ask that question. I have been to around 20 including 2 of my own and have never heard it. I'm a church music director at a small church right outside a downtown area. We get a lot of homeless people that come in during church, or anytime the doors are open really. Once we had a guy who kept coming and sitting in the back while the wedding was getting set up. I asked him to leave twice and said we would call the police if he came back. We didn't see him for a while but he came back in after the wedding started. We didn't see him and no one spoke up. When the pastor asked if there were any objections, the homeless guy said yee right here. He didn't stand or raise his hand, just sat there. It really awkward and they tried to proceed, but he did it again. The bride's father turned beet red and looked ready to kick some butt. 2 big guys in the back of the church stood up and asked the guy to leave, which he did. Then the pastor laughed a little and told the photographers to erase that part. He said, "Action. Does anyone object? Weird stuff like this always happens. We're pretty used to it now." Not yet, but at the OE I was at last week, the friend performing the service asked, "Is there any objections to this union? Speak now and get beaten by a group of people." This being said by one of the only people not in a costume or carrying a weapon. And while the best man dressed in a wedding dress and the bride's father dressed as Santa watched on. I was at a wedding in China where this happened. The pastor asked the question and many people spoke up. I nearly fell off my chair. The reason was that the question was asked like a normal Mandarin question. Literally, have you or have you not any reason why this couple may not lawfully marry? And the correct negative response is to say, have not. In other circumstances it wouldn't have surprised me, but in this context I was expecting absolute silence. Yes, at my aunt's wedding my own mother spoke up. She said she knew it wouldn't work out. 3 years later my aunt is divorced. When the priest asked if there were any objections, the entire church could hear the bride's father hiss, think of something." The priest paused. There was a long moment of silence, and then the ceremony resumed. Years later, the groom dumped the bride for one of his co-workers, and then her family rejoiced. No, but at one wedding I was at, the child of the couple, who was only about 3 or 4, started getting restless, waiting and pouting. She screamed, "It's my wedding," made the whole crowd laugh. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.